Hey guys, I would just like to thank you for being so patient during COVID. I went down the COVID rabbit hole, as I'm sure many of you did, but luckily during that time we still had some new patrons show up. So thank you to Gabrielle T. And we also had one new elder, which was Justin from the Obscura True Crime podcast. So I have to get together with him and do one of the extra bonuses for that. But again, thank you guys so much for understanding and still being here when I came back. And I hope you all are doing well. Thank you to all the patrons and all the supporters. Here's the episode.
And then let me be good this time and actually record on here. Welcome back, Collective. I'm back with Brandon. We've still been talking. This is about hour 4 of this recording because quarantine's driving us crazy.
Not crazy, just it's social interaction we're not getting otherwise, right?
Well, yeah.
You know, it's good to talk to like-minded people when you're locked away in your little house, right?
Yeah, I have not left my house since Sunday, and it is Friday.
Yeah. We're on day 8, I think, here of not leaving, so
I'm on almost day 14.
Oh dear.
I don't know exactly what day. I'm counting them by Sundays. I'm almost on my 3rd Sunday.
Well, like I said, we have 12 rolls of toilet paper left, so let's do the math. I have a family of 4. Yeah.
With children who do not know the importance of toilet paper. Let's not forget that.
When does Brandon need to leave the house again? What's the equation here?
Probably soon.
Well, we'll see what happens.
You gotta go hunt. Earlier, you got to hunt earlier for toilet paper. It's that white gold.
Yeah. Well, maybe when it gets down to like 2 or 3 rolls, we'll just start getting leaves for the kids, and Brittany and I'll live in luxury.
My brother always joked with people that my mom made us. She would buy like 2-ply so we could divide it in half.
Oh dear, yeah.
Or we'd go out in the woods and get leaves. But the funny thing is, my mom and my brother are very allergic to poison ivy. The rest of us really aren't. There's poison ivy and poison oak out there, and they have both gotten it.
Oh, that's not happening at the Sheck Snyder house. We're not picking poison ivy.
They wouldn't pick poison ivy, but it'll be back there while they're looking for leaves. And
I'll run the hose into the house for the kids if I have to before that.
Yeah, but day sales are going up, guys. You don't have to have a separate toilet. You can just attach it to your regular toilet. Kids would have too much fun with that with animals. That would be horrible. I could just picture it.
So I've got a story for you.
Yes, we're going darker and worse. I don't know how we could go worse, but we're going worse.
It always gets worse. There's always something worse, and
in history, it always gets worse.
So, I'm from New Orleans. I'm born and raised from New Orleans, and Southern Gothic is really, I know I'm the one that's usually the voice. My sister's podcast just as much as mine, and we grew up down there, and how everybody in the South is probably everywhere, right? Everybody always gets that story that you hear that's like local legend, and you don't really know the legend, but you hear what like your friend in middle school told you about it, and you might hear what like your mama told you about it, you might, and you kind of like don't really know.
Minus melon heads.
There you go. Yeah.
No. It creeps me out to be in the woods at dark up by my parents. I don't like it.
But do you really know what's behind that story? Have you ever really looked into it and known where like the history of it is? Where
I have, and it's still not clear.
Yeah.
That's the worst part.
Sometimes it makes it creepier. Like sometimes it really does. But anyway, this story is kind of one of the ones we grew up with down in New Orleans. It's Madame LaLaurie. And anybody else out there that's interested, if you watched American Horror Story, in the New Orleans, I think it was the Coven series, yes. Kathy Bates plays Madame LaLaurie in that series, the sadistic Creole socialite,
No one deserved that more than Kathy Bates. She
was incredible.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, she was absolutely everything I think about with LaLaurie and that extreme elitism, because here's the deal. I mean, even in the legends that I learned and what history is so LaLaurie she was a Creole socialite, and Creole, when you hear the term Creole now, there might be different things, and you're Creole and Cajun in food, right? Well, what a Creole person is in this sense was essentially France. France had made their colony here. And had New France, and New Orleans was part of their colony. And Creoles were people who came from European ancestry, which later kind of evolved to anyone, but that were born in a French colony. All right. So basically what it was is, she had rich French aristocratic parents who moved to New Orleans, she was born in the colonies, so she's considered Creole. And a lot of that culture, when you hear that Creole culture, is that kind of hodgepodge of all the different cultures that came to New Orleans and started almost a new one in a lot of ways. But
yeah, it's basically how Creole is delineation of first generation, second generation, mixed. It's the Spanish have a similar thing. You have like mezzo, and like it's just a term for colonial heritage and how your genealogy is hodgepodge together.
Yeah, because they were proud to be French. I mean, they were proud of the old country. But she was born here, and you see a lot of that. And then, like I said, Cajun. Cajun doesn't even factor into the story, but the Cajuns were a whole other group of people that were French and came down from Canada. But that's kind of the two major groups you think of with New Orleans. But Madame LaLaurie she was a rich girl, grew up Creole socialite. Obviously, being a rich Creole, growing up in New Orleans, she was born, believe it was 17. You see, I'm bad with numbers too sometimes, Courtney. Circa 1785, 80, or 1775, 1787.
At that period, it's hit or miss if you got dates.
Yeah, you're lucky. Exactly. She grew up with a lot of money and all, but here's where the story's dark, if you haven't heard it. So on April 10th, 1834,
dun, dun, dun.
A fire breaks out at the mansion that she owns in the French Quarter. This is a beautiful mansion, large mansion. She lives there with her husband. Her family obviously has been a part of this high society, beautiful mansion where she's had dinner parties. She's done all the wonderful socialite things.
Ballroom. It's probably about half a block or something. It's giant.
It's a large house, yeah. And you can still see it down there in the French Quarter. It's at 1140 Royal Street, or if you want to really get technical, Rue Royale. So anyway, this fire breaks out, at Madame LaLaurie's house. Of course, knowing this rich person with his beautiful home, all the police and neighbors and firefighters are all rushing to the mansion, like, we're going to help with this fire. But as the flames die down, what LaLaurie's interested in is she's interested in saving her art and her furniture, her china, all her valuables, and supposedly, when she was kind of asked about, well, what about your slaves that are in there? She flat out is quoted as saying, never mind them now, save the valuables. Obviously, a kind of bit of that.
Yeah, isn't it different in New Orleans? The slave culture was very different than the rest of the South. They were kind of treated better. They had more protection. Everyone kind of had this agreement that we're not going to treat our slaves really bad. We have to treat them with respect and like as people. And
right. Well, New Orleans had so the French treated them differently than, let's say, the British on the East Coast, because most of the society was built on what was called the Code Noir, which is kind of the French's view of how you would treat slavery. They had Sundays off to congregate and could buy their freedom. Now, I do not want to say that slavery was better in New Orleans, because New Orleans was an epicenter of the slave trade.
Oh, yeah.
And had horrific things happen there. And even 20 years before Madame LaLaurie showed up, you had one of the largest slave revolts happened right there in New Orleans, and on the German coast there in New Orleans. And they put this slave revolt down and put all the slaves' heads on pikes on the levee, which is a whole nother gruesome story. So there's definitely, they had a different view. The French still viewed enslaved people as people with souls. So they still, still allowed them to have religion and spirituality and those sorts of things. They still had different things. But what New Orleans was unique in this time frame is that New Orleans had a lot of free people of color there. It was a very, very weird tiered society to the rest of America, and before this fire here, the Louisiana Purchase was in 1803, and you have this French society now all of a sudden is American against their will.
Yeah, wasn't it French, Spanish, or no, it was Spanish, then French, then American, so it's a very big European hodgepodge.
It was French, so it started somewhere around 1720. I can't remember the exact date. We just celebrated our 300th anniversary. All right. So somewhere around 1720, it was French. It was a French outpost. Then the Spanish took it over 1764 after the 7 Years' War, whatever around there. The Spanish took it over. It still stayed pretty French. The Spanish were more interested in stuff, but that's when the fire, some great fires, big fires that devastated the city happened, and the Spanish rebuilt the city. So right now, when you go to New Orleans, all that architecture is really Spanish.
Yeah.
It's all Spanish architecture. All the cities of the dead, all the tombs. That's Spanish influence. It's not French.
Because the Spanish are much more, people don't realize, the Spanish are more distant kind of imperialists. They're going to use the local infrastructure. The British were more like, we're going to use the local infrastructure to interweave ourselves into this and change it to our ways. And I feel like the French are a mix between the two, where they're going to be slightly distant, culturally more impactful than the British being like, we're going to make everything very British and very, like you see, Indian and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of stuff. You look in New Orleans history, the Spanish did, a bunch of Cajuns tried to revolt against the Spanish, in kind of 1790, 1780 region. There was a little bit of fighting there, but really it all kind of, when it got Americanized, these French Creoles that have been running this city for years and have had, money and everything, these rich, they were not happy with the Americans. They did not want to be American.
What? The French not wanting to be American? Shocking.
They did not want to be American. So LaLaurie, here she is, and she's this, this is her. She basically is emblematic of this old world kind of thing. As Creole society starting to die off in the 1830s. Well, I don't want to say die off, but it's starting to lose their power and control. So this crazy picture, Kathy Bates, right? Crazy woman is saying, never mind the slaves, valuables, a little tip off, say. But some people, some of the judges and some of the prominent citizens that are there to help her, they get a little pissed off at this, right? They're a little angry. They're like, we're gonna get the hell in the house. So these three men, I say that I can pronounce French things and stuff. I might not try this here. Judge Canonge, I can't pronounce that one. Monsieur Mathieu, Monsieur Lefebvre, and Senor Fernandez. So there's actually a Spanish name in there. So these men decided we're gonna go the hell in the house, see if anybody else is in there.
Because isn't it suspicious? Like, mine was suspicious, but this is really suspicious, being like, don't worry about the slaves. And everyone's like thinking, don't be suspicious. Don't be suspicious.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to rip that now.
I don't know. Yeah. I don't know. I wonder what really happened of it, because, I'll tell you in a little while how, there's some stories that say that some people kind of thought she was already being a little sadistic. And we couldn't really tell from looking at stuff of whether that was after the fact these stories were made, or if she really did show signs of being sadistic. But, these men go in the third floor, and I mean, it's like the most gruesome scene I'm not going to say the most and be that superlative, but this is one of the most gruesome scenes in the history of slavery in this country. They break down this door that's locked on the third floor of the building, and inside there's 10 slaves. Some of them are locked in cages like animals. They're all in advanced stages of starvation. They're all chained. There's some chained to the walls. It gets worse. Some of them have gaping wounds that are literally infected with maggots.
Well, I mean, maggots can clean your wounds. That's what people don't realize. It's gross, but they'll eat the dead and keep it alive. So, they'll eat the infection. Right.
And this could have been an experiment, as you're about to hear the next part. This could have been her husband that was doing that I'll go into. But not only are there these gaping wounds, but what's truly horrific is there's even 2 slaves, a man and a woman, were discovered with their genitals surgically removed and attached to the other person of the opposite sex. All right. There's plucked out eyeballs. A couple of them have plucked out eyeballs. They have lips sewn shut. There's one with his intestines removed and wrapped around his chest. This was literally a horror show of someone doing experiments on these people. And not like necessarily even experiments that were a fruit of any type of real knowledge, but somebody really sadistically doing this to them.
How do you get the intestines out? One, everybody's seen the picture of your intestines. They're kind of packed in there.
Yeah.
So as soon as you cut that open, say you don't nick an intestine, because if that goes anywhere else, you're fucked.
Yeah.
You have to wrap them around someone without breaking.
Yeah.
How do you
I don't know. I don't know. I'm a podcaster, not a doctor, Courtney. I don't.
I'll ask my sister wouldn't know that. I was gonna say I'll ask my sister. I'll ask my sister-in-law. She's a nurse.
No, at the same time, with everything we're talking about, who knows really what's total reality and what was newspaper stories and what might have been a little embellished. But
who doesn't love newspapers at this time? They have a great time embellishing, having a good
Oh, yeah.
time,
Absolutely.
spinning that wheel. Like, how bad are we going to make it? Super bad? Got it.
Yep, that's exactly. And I think that's really where this is going to go. Of, so they of these slaves, seven slaves lived, 3 of them died. They brought them down to the Cabildo. If you ever been to Jackson Square, the big cathedral that's in all the pictures in New Orleans, right next door to the St. Louis Cathedral it's called the Cabildo. It's Spanish, Cabildo. It was basically the city hall, jail, everything for the city of New Orleans. So they bring these guys down there. Obviously, a mob has formed. Over 4,000 citizens have now come out to see the slaves and see the atrocities and see what's going on.
How many people live in New Orleans at this time?
Oh gosh, we might have to Google that. I'm not
We're
sure.
Take a Google break.
Well, we're not going to get an exact census, are we, on New Orleans in 1830?
You might. Anything within the last, I think it's 50 years, you can get online.
40. Usually censuses around 1850 you start getting.
That's true.
I think that's when it's
horrible handwriting.
Let's see. So, they're estimating about 46,000 people in New Orleans at this time.
So about 4,000 of 40.
Basically, yeah, I'm 4,000. So what's that? 10%? A little less than 10%.
We're gonna do what I always do and get the calculator out. Nope, that's not the calculator. 4,000. Oh no, went back down. 4,000 of 46,000. It is 87%.
No.
0.87%. Sorry.
8.7.
0.87.
Is that right?
Yeah.
So, obviously, a lot of people come out to see it. Mobs building on the street, they're pissed, like we were talking about earlier. This was an atrocity to do to any human. And they even believed that when it came to enslaved people. So this wasn't, this was a big deal. And the fact that it was one of their social elite made it an even bigger deal. So anyway, the mob tears the house to pieces. The mob gets inside. They tear it to pieces. LaLaurie gets the fuck out of town.
She bounces. She's like, bye-bye.
She sneaks out. Supposedly she makes it. She heads down to Mobile and takes a ship over to France.
Question. Do you think she dressed as a man? Because, men dress as women to escape. Do you think she reversed it?
Ooh, I wonder what she did.
Because, if she's a socialite, people know her face, they know her character, like all of that. So you have to dress up as somebody different. And cross-dressing has historically been a way to get out of town.
Yeah. We're gonna have to call my sister for that one. I'll ask her. Because, yeah. Which, I don't know. I don't know how she got out of town. That would be interesting to look up. But one of the reasons I say call Brienne is where she works has the archives of like every New Orleans newspaper. So she's actually pulled out the original copies of these newspapers to find this information.
That's history porn right there. That's history porn. You press newspaper, you look at it, you're like, oh.
She sends me pictures of these things. And Brienne is an archivist down there in New Orleans. She's really obsessed with signatures. She really likes signatures.
So
Every
cool.
historian has a thing. Like, I'm not a historian, but I really love to go stand in a place where somebody was. I just think that's the coolest thing. Brienne likes to find their original signatures, and she hasn't been able to find LaLaurie's, but she's tried. Yeah,
Ooh.
she's been. Well, so we got where were we? She skipped town as a man.
Yeah.
Not
I
really.
asked a poignant question,
really.
and then we got distracted.
Not really. She. We really don't know she skipped as a man. Or that's not even suggesting. We're making up legends here, Courtney.
I'm just
Stop.
saying it's statistically possible.
Yeah.
We don't know that she didn't. We don't know that she did. But historically, cross-dressing has been a way to escape.
Well, I have the mystery for you here that I'll get to at the end, which is what really happened to her at the end of the road. So, aside from that part. But, so she skips town. Yeah. She skips town, makes it back to France. Of course.
When did she get to France?
She skips town after. She heads over to Mobile. She gets on a ship and she heads over to France. Now, there are documents and letters she wrote in France showing she was there. Mm-hmm. I don't have any right here.
Do you just know the date?
Because I don't.
Because, wait, when was the fire?
The fire was 1834, April 1834.
So, I'm just thinking French Revolution-wise.
Right, yeah.
So, she could either be guillotined. That's what...
Oh, no. Let's put this one on hold, what happens to her, because I got some mysteries for you that we can...
Do we know where she went in France?
We don't. We don't. I don't have. Well, we might know where. Let me see if I have it in my notes.
That's intriguing because it might depend. If she went to Paris, she's a little more fucked.
I doubt it was. Let's see. She's.
Because even with Napoleon, like if anybody's coming into France, they're going to come for Paris.
Well, here's the deal. Here's why she went to France. Being the rich aristocrat that she was, socialite. The reason they went back to France is they knew she would not be punished for her crime.
She was rich and
did
white.
live. Yeah, and yeah, exactly. But anyway, so how the fire started. This is reality as well. This isn't part of the legend. This fire was started by a cook who was chained to the stove in the kitchen on a chain. And this cook started the fire with the lard buckets and spread the fire because she was done with what was going on in that house. Clearly she knew. I mean, these are people who are literally undergoing starvation amidst like plentiful food and riches. These are people that are being beaten and plentiful food and riches. But anyway, so that's how the fire actually started.
Which, if you think about it, lard is fat. Fat burn pretty quickly. Fun fact, it's actually easier to burn a fat person than a skinny person. For cremation.
For cremation. Yeah, you should have started with that. So it sounds less suspicious.
I knew someone who's training to cremate people. Jimmy. My friends in Washington will know Jimmy. He worked at the parks with me. Jimmy, very nice. Little offbeat, very nice person. But he was telling me that it's harder to burn a skinny person because you have to burn a body so much longer.
It's so hot.
Yeah, so you have to. It's 3,000 degrees to burn a human body. In case you're wondering. And so if you have fat burns at a lower temperature, so it starts earlier. So it costs more to get the gas and all that stuff in the crematorium if you're skinny. So if you're skinny, fuck it.
Wow.
Don't cremate yourself. It's more expensive. Just naturally decay.
But I mean, you're not the one paying for it.
But aren't you?
Oh man. Well, that's the question though. What happened to LaLaurie? So I mean, well, let me tell you before I tell you where she probably got buried, because that's the mystery. What happened to her? Let me just tell you a little bit about what happened after she skipped town. Right. So we're talking about America thinks that these Creole people are nuts. Right. New Orleans is a city that built an opera house before they built a sewage system. That's how backwoods we are, right? We need the beauty.
Love it.
You know?
We need culture before toilet. Let's go.
Absolutely. So here's LaLaurie here. So after the fact, obviously this is hitting newspapers, and I mean, like, Madame LaLaurie was a figurehead. She was old school New Orleans, and this is what they did. So therefore, let's make her. But the reality of it at the same time, and I'm not going to apologize for Madame LaLaurie or say that she wasn't sadistic, but her husband was a failed doctor. All right. So LaLaurie came from all this money. This was her third husband. He was said to be much younger. He was a mediocre medical student in France, and he came over to New Orleans and basically didn't have a practice, no record of his practice, and any of that. He basically, she basically still ran the house and all, and she was no stranger to being married to crazy people, because she had been married to two people before, one of which was involved in smuggling, quote, black ivory, which would be after the transatlantic slave trade died or was put to an end. He continued to smuggle slaves from outside the country and made a lot of money, and he mysteriously disappeared. Her first husband also mysteriously disappeared. He was a part of the Spanish government and was called back because apparently he did something incorrect. So she's had a little bit of a, and some people say she got married at 13. Some people say that maybe some of these things, that his involvement in the French city pissed off the Spanish, maybe his marriage to LaLaurie. There's debates there. I don't know the full depth of all of those marriages, but
did they say, is it confirmed that she got married at 13?
Well, okay. So when we did an episode on LaLaurie, we treated it like this wasn't confirmed. Mm-hmm. Now, Brienne now has some stuff where she flat out is saying she thinks that LaLaurie was married at 13. So that's her view. It's not that strange of a thing in that society.
No, but
to be married off to rich people marrying their kids off.
The ceremony would happen, but it wouldn't be consummated for a couple of years, because in the War of the Roses, the whole Tudor line, came because Henry VII, his mom, she got married at 10.
Mhm.
They weren't supposed to consummate it till she was like 15.
Right.
Husband said no, screwed her. When she gave birth, your body's not ready. So she basically could not have kids after Henry VII. That's why there's a lot of energy. If you watch as much,
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
the White Queen, the White Princess, those series on Stars and the books by everyone will know. They'll probably be screaming at me, but you know those books. That's why there's a lot of energy focus. But they had rules like if you got married at that point, you're like people always are like, oh, they consummated it. No. You had a marriage and then they waited a certain period until the woman they basically would wait until probably like 14, 15. You weren't.
Well, I mean, I personally think you're probably giving them a little more credit. I wouldn't trust a man in any day and age to begin with.
I don't trust it, but like if they would still they would have separate bedrooms and all that.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, obviously from Margaret Beaufort's case, it didn't always happen. And people criticized her husband for it because they saw like an 11-year-old pregnant and your body like is not ready. And so,
well, I mean, outright, if she's married at 13 and this husband is consummating it, I mean, you are creating enough emotional damage into that poor girl that
she doesn't know what's going on.
It's going to make you sadistic. It's going to give you problems. And I have a 12-year-old daughter. I cannot imagine. She's so far from being grown up. And, I cannot imagine the kind of harm that's been inflicted here. And, and maybe that's why at the end of the day, she married somebody younger that she could control, as she was older, But, the question is was it her doing this?
Mm-hmm.
Like, was it her that was actively doing these horrific things? Man, she's a strong French Creole woman that owned that house. That house was her house that she ran. She knew what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
She had to. No way she couldn't. But was it this husband who kind of was just this lame doctor from France or not? Or was it her? And the newspapers hardly mention him. Everything revolved around her because of her status in that society.
It's like her status, and think about it, it's also her sex. We don't have a lot of female serial killers at that time. We barely have them now.
Yeah, well, she would be the first female serial killer in America if this is true. Because even Lavinia Fisher over in North Carolina, she's considered, if you Google first female serial killer in the United States, you're going to get Lavinia Fisher and over in Charleston. And fact remains, she probably didn't even kill anybody. She was a highway robber that was just executed. Well, LaLaurie's like that. Look, this has been going on since Adam and Eve. The woman's going to get blamed, and this seems like a case like that. It doesn't mean that, again, she seems sadistic. Again, Kathy Bates was like, what was it? She was putting people's blood on her face to be youthful, and that,
they were pulling
all that,
Madame Beaufort, what is it? The Countess from Eastern Europe.
Bathory?
Bathory, yes. That. They said they did that. I wonder if it was just the perfect storm where her husband wanted to do experiments and she just needed to get the pain out. So it was just they both met. The perfect storm. If they hadn't met, like there's a lot of serial killer cases where if they hadn't met, things wouldn't happen.
Right. Yeah, that's definitely questionable. I don't know. So there's some hearsay on really what went on with her parents. There's some stories saying that her parents were actually killed in Saint Dominique, which was a large slave colony in the revolt there. That her parents were killed by slaves. We don't really believe it's true. I don't think there's a lot of documentation there. So there's some things saying that maybe. Now, I was saying before, we don't really know which true. There were stories saying that she had gotten in trouble for mistreating her slaves prior to this. And there's actually a story that there's no documentation on this story whatsoever. It's just been handed down. That in 1832, this would have been before the house fire, she killed a 7-year-old slave girl. All right. And what they're told is, this 7-year-old girl was tasked with brushing the madam's hair, right?
Oh, that's terrifying. And, think about it.
And I know. Of course, guess what happens? The girl hits a snag, and all of a sudden, LaLaurie goes apeshit on her, right? Enraged, going after her for pulling her hair too hard. Apparently, he's whipping the child. Child goes running out. They're on the 3rd floor of the house. And whether or not the child decided to just jump off the railing to her death to escape it, or she just got the shit beaten out of her to where she was pushed through the bars, supposedly the 7-year-old slave girl died, from falling 30 feet. And, the story goes on that neighbors heard and called the police, and the police came a few days later, couldn't find anything wrong. The story says that the body of the young girl was buried in the courtyard. There's never been a body found in the courtyard. So that kind of story might have been put in after the fact to try and extra characterize her as, the monster.
That's always the crazy thing about this is you have to detangle the myth, like the post-myth, from the actual facts. And yeah, she could have, but if we don't have documentation of people going to the police, if we don't have documentation of them looking for it.
Right. Yeah, it's drastically different. Yeah. Yeah, it's hard, and I mean, that's a lot of what we try and do with these stories is we try and find where's the hole, where's the question here, what's really interesting that might be real and what isn't. And we don't really have that with this story.
Yeah, so separating these myths that we get from history back into the present and trying to figure out the fact from what actually happened. LaLaurie is kind of a prime example, don't you think of it? Where you have a lot of myth and a lot of creation afterwards.
Well, that's absolutely everything about her, is she was such a stereotype of someone that would have been hated whether or not she did this crime or not. Maybe hated's the wrong word, but such a stereotype of something that was on the decline and its way out. The French were losing control in New Orleans at that point. The Americans had come in and, were trying to Americanize this, and their way of life was changing. It was, it was dying, and she was kind of someone that was still holding on to it. So now I will say, we're talking about separating that. Now, there are records that she actually did give one of her slaves freedom. Several years before, she did actually free one of her slaves, and while that documentation's real, some people say that actually is what started causing strife in her marriage, and started lifting to some of the upheaval. But so there's competing stories about her. There's definitely competing stories, and we don't really know what happened. We never will. We never are going to know more because all that's left are newspaper articles, and these newspapers, they're trying to sell copies just like today, right? But now you talk about the documents. This is my favorite part, is what the hell happened to her, like we were talking about.
She's a vampire living amongst us, stealing our souls.
Well, if you ask American Horror Story, she was like, her head was chopped off, and what's her name? Madame Laveau made her immortal to to hurt her, but that's not true. So really, we're never going to know what happened to LaLaurie, so this is all conjecture. But supposedly, she came back to New Orleans. Quietly came back to New Orleans.
Snuck back in the back door?
Totally. Now, she's from a family line, and the family that her ancestors are still everywhere in New Orleans. The names of some of her ancestors are still down there. Now, it's not like they're still running the city like that, but they are old New Orleans names at this point. And supposedly, now, there's a couple different theories on it. She came back and lived with one of her daughters in her old age, snuck back in the city when nobody was likely to know her anymore. And she either went by her son-in-law's last name or she went by her maiden name. All right. And so much so that a few decades ago in St. Louis Cemetery Number 1, which is our oldest cemetery, the big cities of the dead.
The most famous cemetery, yes.
Yeah, most famous one down there. And a plaque was found with her name on it somewhere. Now, they think that was false. They think that
Really?
that might have been bullshit. However, there is, in her son-in-law's family tomb, there is a headstone that looks like the same dates and looks like it's her by a slightly altered name. So, LaLaurie might have won in the end. She might have come back to New Orleans and gotten to live out her life. Brienne has some letters that she had found from that time of someone purchasing property and talking to people that were about the same age that were right over, I believe, is in the 9th Ward. There's some things like that kind of lead credence to this, but you can't totally connect the names. This is still early history, early documents here.
Yeah, people don't realize documentation heavily doesn't come until the 19th century. So 19th century, 1800s, and really about mid. We're having early historians, like pretty much early historians are 1850s and before,
Right.
which is crazy. So archives, libraries, collecting things like that, still very new.
Well, the middle of the 19th century is when United States Census records started listing every person in the house.
Yeah.
And that's been a giant shift in how, so whereas before it would be, it would say, Monsieur Louis LaLaurie, and he's got a house of 5. And it wouldn't say any of their names, but, the censuses then started listing people, every single name. That's made it easier to track people. Obviously, I mean, if, the Civil War, it's one of the most studied things in American history. And there is a lot of documents there. So you're right. I mean, this is totally pre what those historians are doing. But, that house is still there. The house is still there. It's been rebuilt twice. It's had two different incantations, if you will. And like I was telling you earlier, Nicolas Cage bought the house at one point. Everybody knows about Nicolas Cage's a fancy time in New Orleans. And then I believe he declared bankruptcy and sold the house.
Wasn't the rumor it was like the curse of the house caused him
to go crazy? Because he wasn't crazy before. Come on.
I mean, he was so famous that like nobody tells him no. So you're like, okay, cool. That's why he goes crazy. But I think like what I heard was the house caused him to go bankrupt, so he'd have to sell the house.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know enough about his particular ownership that much. I mean, when let me see if I can find the years that in my notes here. He bought it in 2007.
So right before the crash, maybe with the crash.
Yeah, right before the crash.
Oh.
That's also post Katrina that he bought the house, which is a pretty big point there. Yeah. So we went through that, and then Nick Cage, I guess, bought this house. So now this house here, though, it's like, I mean, it was treated as a haunted house. We've got some old newspapers advertising haunted tours at the LaLaurie house and stuff like that, but it's still there. If you get a chance to go down the French Quarter, it's this large gray 3-story square building on the corner of Royal Street.
Tag us in pictures if you have them on Instagram. Tag us, post them to us so that way we can see you guys in front of the mansion. Yeah,
if you go to my Instagram, I've got a couple. I think I have a picture of it, and if you go far enough back, you can see my daughter standing in front of it actually. And it's cool. It's still private. You still can't go. You can't go in. There are pictures online of what it was like inside. Of course, they did like a ghosty kind of motif. But yeah, I mean, anyway, that's the story of a gruesome young woman, or not so young.
What do you think happened to her? Like, do you think she came back to New Orleans actually? Or do you think she just died in France? Or do you think she never made it out? So
I think she came back. I think she came home. I think that this is one of those stories where I'm definitely jaded by how I grew up hearing it. So I struggle a little bit, and the way a lot of people might, as I'm telling this story, if they saw American Horror Story, they're picturing Kathy Bates in their mind. I'm going to say something that sounds really awful, and I think of my grandmother and not because she's an awful person. My grandmother passed away a few years back, but because she was so old school New Orleans, and this kind of like she grew up uptown in New Orleans and just had that kind of that Yat New Orleans accent, and was like darling, and just had the kind of woman that like would have been the belle of the Creole, community hundreds of years before. So because I kind of, in whatever weird way, think of LaLaurie as kind of a disturbing version of my grandmother, I cannot imagine my grandmother not coming back. This just strong-willed New Orleans woman. I can't imagine her going and being fine living in France. And so I don't know what, hopefully one day Brianne will write a book for us where she finds some more source materials and we can learn a little more about it. But until then, it's a mystery.
I agree with you. I think she came home because, think about it. For someone who that's their identity.
Yeah.
I could, if you told me I could not go back to Cleveland, I'm going to totally fucking go back to Cleveland.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
It's part of my heart and soul. I love so many things about that city. I'm going to go back.
Yeah. I mean, and that's, I'm talking about my grandmother here. And, she lived in a house for 50 years. A house my grandfather built 50 years. I mean, and now my sister's living there, and we tease she's coming back. She's still coming back.
She's still there. What are you talking about? Yeah, she's still there.
This is her place. She is not leaving it. So, I mean, I think LaLaurie came back. I totally believe that she would have been able to. I think that's what that culture was like. I think, New Orleans is a very, very different city for years, and at the same time, I didn't even kind of mention New Orleans was freaking rich before the Civil War. I mean, it was there were more millionaires in between New Orleans and Natchez, Mississippi on the Mississippi River before the Civil War than there were in New York.
Oh, yeah.
This was rich. This was a rich town and it made a lot of money and was very much mired in old world and kind of this wrapped in Catholicism and all the trappings of New Orleans were there.
It won Jackson the frickin' presidency.
Yeah. Well, if you ask me, the battle in New Orleans, the Cajuns won it. The Cajun Navy won it, and Andrew Jackson just happened to be there. But that's a whole nother tale for another time.
He did just happen to be there, but he claimed it with a proud flag,
Yeah.
So that just shows you, like, the amount people fought over New Orleans showed the jewel in the cap it was.
Oh,
like,
absolutely. Yeah.
That's what
really
people don't realize. That's what Thomas Jefferson wanted. He didn't know how much land was beyond. He wanted the Mississippi River and he wanted New Orleans.
Absolutely.
He was petty like that.
Well, you look at, what New France was. New France was all of Canada, and then it was like a stripped down Mississippi, and then that chunk of Louisiana. And then when the Spanish took over, when they had to cede New Orleans to Spanish, all the Spanish was it was like Florida's panhandle over to the Mississippi River. They didn't want all this land from France. They wanted New Orleans, and I mean, that was the mouth of the river. So a lot of industry going through there, more than just, like I talk about, more than just kind of being the center of slave trade. It really.
Think about it this way. Any trade that went down the Mississippi, if you were going to get it to Europe, you had to go through New Orleans. So that sweet, sweet tax money ran through New Orleans. That's why people wanted it. So, Brandon, why don't you tell everyone where to find you so they can learn more about the mysteries of the South?
You can find us on any podcatcher out there. We're on Spotify and Apple, everything. It's Southern Gothic is the name, and we actually do have an episode on LaLaurie if you're more interested in New Orleans. We did a little 3-part mini-series on the history of New Orleans and all the ghosts and everything that have come out of it about a year ago. It's called Birth of a City.
So good. So good.
And and a lot of our podcasting friends lent their voices. So like Donna from A Paranormal Chicks, she did a voice of an 18th century nun talking about how awful of a place New Orleans was. Justin Drown from Obscura, he did a voice in there. I can't remember who he was now.
He was great.
But I mean, his voice is so boomy cool.
Oh, yeah.
And then he's a great guy. And, Javier Leyva from Pretend Radio, he did a voice in that little series. So it's a lot of fun. And you can find that also at southerngothicmedia.com or find us on Instagram, Facebook, all the places.
And next week we'll have a new guest, sadly. But I know, sadly you're not sticking around and we're just not chatting because this is almost hour 5.
Yeah, we'll have to find another time, man. Find some topics that fit us.
Yeah. But I'll catch you guys later. Bye.
All right, y'all. Bye. Prepare to enter an immersive world of tragedies, hauntings, legends, and folklore. Southern Gothic is an independently produced podcast documenting the rich history of the American South. Stretching from the swamps of Louisiana to the shores of the Carolinas, deep into the mountains of Appalachia, and across the battlefields and earliest settlements of Virginia. Guiding you through some of its darkest tales and eerie locations. Join us now on Southern Gothic, the podcast.
Go.
Were you traumatized as a child by watching Unsolved Mysteries?
Do you like to judge facial hair?
Guess what?
We have a podcast for you.
Can you believe it? It's called Perhaps It's You, and it is an unofficial Unsolved Mysteries rewatch podcast.
We're your hosts. I'm Samantha.
I'm Liz. We're two cool mystery ants, not really, watch an episode of Unsolved Mysteries each week
and tell you about it.
We update you if any of the mysteries have been solved.
We rate the episode on a scale of Robert Stacks. We can give episodes a possible 5 out of 5 Robert Stacks, although it rarely happens.
Very rarely. We also complain about what everyone is wearing. And it doesn't really matter if you know anything about Unsolved Mysteries or not. You should tune in because it's the #1 podcast on iTunes.
Yeah, you can find us on Google Play, Apple Podcasts, most podcast platforms. You can also check out our website, perhapsitsyou.com, or find us on the social medias at Perhaps It's You.
Yep. And
get out there and solve some mysteries, bitches.
Yeah.
Cult of Domesticity. We're available on all podcatchers. Remember to rate, review, subscribe to help spread the word, or just force other people to listen to it. Our Facebook and Twitter are at Domestic Podcast, and our Instagram is at the Cult of Domesticity. We also have podcast merch at Threadless. As well, if you want to support us financially or show some appreciation, we have a PayPal tip jar and a Patreon, which has some pretty great perks. Any topic suggestions, feel free to email us at domesticpodcast@gmail.com. Remember to stay domestic and cult-free.